This morning, Donald Trump released a statement proclaiming today Columbus Day. Now, in this proclamation, Trump describes Christopher Columbus's contributions to the Americas, which unfortunately included mass killings, rapings, and dismembering. But nonetheless, Trump wrote, "The permanent arrival of Europeans to the Americas was a transformative event that undeniably and fundamentally changed the course of human history and set the stage for the development of our great nation. Therefore, on Columbus Day, we honor the skilled navigator and man of faith whose courageous feat brought together continents and has inspired countless others to pursue their dreams and convictions, even in the face of extreme doubt and tremendous adversity. I call upon the people of the United States to observe this day with appropriate ceremonies and activities. I also direct that the flag of the United States be displayed on all public buildings on the appointed day in honor of our diverse history and all who have contributed to shaping this nation." Okay, that was a lot to unpack, but unfortunately, historical evidence shows that Trump's facts might be alternative facts. And according to Bartolomé de las Casas, who participated in these expeditions, but actually became one of the primary chroniclers of Columbus, and he wrote that this man of faith actually carried out some pretty faithless actions. So he wrote, "Endless testimonies prove the mild and pacific temperament of the natives. But our work was to exasperate, ravage, kill, mangle, and destroy. And the Christians, with their horses and swords and pikes, began to carry out massacres and strange cruelties against them. They attacked the towns and spared neither the children nor the aged, nor pregnant women, nor women in childbed, not only stabbing them and dismembering them, but cutting them to pieces as if dealing with sheep in the slaughterhouse. They laid bets as to who, with one stroke of the sword, could split a man in two, or could cut off his head, or spill out his entrails with a single stroke of the pike." Now, even one of Columbus's own crew members actually wrote and bragged about his crimes. He wrote, "While I was in the boat, I captured a very beautiful Carib woman whom the said Lord Admiral gave to me. When I had taken her to my cabin, she was naked, as was their custom. I was filled with a desire to take my pleasure with her and attempted to satisfy my desire. She was unwilling and so treated me with her nails that I wished I had never begun. But to cut a long story short, I then took a piece of rope and whipped her soundly, and she let forth such incredible screams that you would not have believed your ears. Eventually we came to such terms, I assure you, that you would have thought that she had been brought up in a school for whores." So here are.
So I just wanted to jump in for a second.
Yeah.
That was a lot. Okay, so first of all, back to Trump's statements, he didn't write those, of course. It had words beyond a third grader's capabilities.
He only used tremendous once.
Yes.
I know, I saw that. I was like, that must have been ad-libbed, but it's a statement.
Yeah, a transformative event. That is not a phrase Donald Trump has ever said.
The only thing that stood out to me in his statement that, I mean, probably written by Stephen Miller, who like is getting the whisperings from Bannon in his ear. But when he talks about the permanent arrival of Europeans to the Americas, that is like dog whistling, like, all right, I'm here for you, I'm calling for you. We have European, roots and things like that. I mean, that's what he's calling for.
There's a call out to the diverse makeup of the nation, or he uses the word diverse, but if you look through the rest of that proclamation, things that weren't necessarily quoted in there, they go off on a tangent about Italian Americans because Christopher, and the diversity that it seems that they're lauding is a diversity of mixed European influences, and not, of course, I mean, the statements about indigenous peoples have been in similar proclamations about Columbus Day in the past. The ones that everyone's come to expect, the part where it says Christopher Columbus made a journey across the ocean, and we would be remiss if we did not take into consideration the vast tragedy that unfolded to people who already lived there.
Right.
But this is very much in complete concert with the strategy of the Trump campaign to say, make America great again, go back to basic things racists say, which is, what happened to Columbus Day? When we just had Columbus Day and we were happy that he came across the ocean blue in 1492. I remember that when I was in grade school in knee pants.
Yeah, so look, we're about to show you the depth of the massacres that Columbus committed. And even just having read those things, and the first set of quotes were from a missionary that was there, so a man of actual faith, and within historical context. And he couldn't believe the massacres and the butchering that was going on at that time, not later, okay? And that is the Lord Admiral is Columbus authorizing the rape of the women there and of the entire land that they saw. But so what Trump's team did here was they doubled down on Columbus is awesome, and he brought white Europeans here, which is great, okay? The indigenous thing is a little unfortunate, right? But when you see the scope of how unfortunate it was, to then say, yeah, Columbus, he's our homeboy, and we're gonna celebrate that guy is unbelievable. And look, when I was a kid, I celebrated Columbus Day because I don't know, that's what I was taught. And and we're like, oh great, he discovered America. Even then I thought, this is a little weird. Seems like he met people, so how could he have discovered the continent if there were already people there?
Right.
But as Hannah's about to tell you, there wasn't much left after him.
Yeah, when the Spanish came, they completely decimated the native populations. In fact, there were about 300,000 inhabitants of Hispaniola in 1492. Between 1494 and 1496, 100,000 had died, half due to mass suicide because they did not want to give in to the Spanish. And by 1508, the population was down to 60,000. And by 1548, it was estimated to be only 500. Not to mention all of the rapings. I mean, he sold 9 and 10-year-old girls into like sexual slavery. He would like cut off people's ears. They would tie some of the natives together, and instead of, if it felt like it was too cumbersome to untie them, they would just cut off their heads because they didn't want to untie them. I mean, this is like just absolutely disgusting,
Monday off.
and the atrocities of this, and to not even like really mention that in your statement, and even recognize that so many cities and states around the country now are saying that they're not celebrating Columbus Day, and in fact they're celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day. It seems like a pretty glaring, I don't know if it was an oversight or something on purpose. Now I do want to show you guys these cities and the states who celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day instead of Columbus Day. So I applaud them on doing that. I think Los Angeles is not on there, but should be included on there. They recently said that we were going to be celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day instead.
Yeah.
So
we just passed it a little while ago in Los Angeles.
Right.
So that's good news. That's just recognizing history. Nobody's saying you wipe it off the history books. In fact, we should study it way more than we do. And if you're wondering about the mass suicides, I mean, look, you could already tell from all the things that Hannah said, but Columbus would demand of not only the adults but the children a certain amount of gold every day that they bring. But there wasn't that much gold in Hispaniola. But he went on the voyage for greed, and he was going to destroy everything in his path to get the gold. And so if they couldn't get the gold, he'd chop off one of their hands and tie it around their necks. And they'd have to try to get it with the rest of their hands. So, and then there was the nonstop rape, et cetera. And the killings were so indiscriminate anyway. All they had was, it seemed, a short, brutal life as long as Columbus was in charge, until they would one day be killed. That's part of why they did mass suicides. Right. So it almost can't get worse. They went from 300,000 people down to 500. It's as big a massacre or genocide as, and certainly within the historical context of how many people were there per capita, as anyone has ever seen. To celebrate that guy is just
You're celebrating a monster. You're celebrating a monster. And I think, a lot of history books cut out, like especially when you're younger, they cut out the atrocities and the horrible acts that he committed. But it's so important to include those and to teach kids that, and to teach kids of sometimes of our ugly history. And I know that we don't like to admit to that, and we don't like to admit to the evil that we've committed as a country sometimes, or as a people sometimes, but it's so important to do so that we don't repeat history, and that we don't try to wipe out, different cultures like some people would like to see right now.
Yeah, and if you loved Columbus Day as a kid, this information is not an affront towards you personally. And I feel like when facts come out about what happened really with Columbus, a lot of folks who support the traditional interpretation of Columbus Day say, you're fighting back against me personally. And the answer is no, this is just more information, because it's very obvious that this simple definition of Columbus coming over here to the Americas and setting up the possibility for exploration of the New World, that's just way too simple, because it's very obvious that it was at the expense of the people who lived here before.
But you know what, I will end on a fun note on this otherwise horribly tragic story by saying that I have a solution for how to fix this. I think actually if Trump makes it to the next Indigenous Peoples Day that he would call Columbus Day next year around.
Don't say such things.
There's no wood.
Come on.
There's no wood. Here it is. Here it is. I got you.
Okay. I think we can convince him to get rid of a Columbus Day if we just explain to him that they came over on the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, and they were undocumented immigrants. Watch the Young Turks commercial-free, download it or stream it, watch it any way you like at tytnetwork.com/join.